Hello, and welcome back to the AVIAtest webinar, a weekly show about aviation and air traffic control. My name is Jeff, and I am your host. Thank you for joining us every week. Tonight, we're going to bring up the very interesting subject of flying in controlled airspace. Now, what is important when we fly in controlled airspace? All right. Well, you may remember, if you've seen the previous episode about how air traffic control works, that air traffic controllers are there to ensure separation and thereby ensure safety of the flight in the area which is under their jurisdiction. So how do they achieve it? We've been through it. Basically, we use more tools at our disposal, which are the radio, the flight plans, and several other systems, such as computers or radar displays. The ultimate goal of air traffic control being that traffic is able to fly safely, but not only. Also, that we maximize the capacity of both the airspace and the aerodromes that we are controlling. Now, you will probably come to me and ask, okay, but isn't that a little bit contrary to each other? Yeah, okay, I understand your point, and basically, yes, we are facing two different paradigms, and it's perfectly normal that that they are both there. Our prime and foremost concern being, of course, safety. So once we have established a certain level of safety, an acceptable level of safety, what happens is that we will also try and maintain a flow of air traffic as smooth and as efficient as possible. But once again, our prime concern is safety. The question that we're going to raise tonight is how you as a pilot can contribute to making the sky a little bit safer. Okay, that's actually quite easy, and you'll see that you don't need to be an airline captain with thousands of hours, of flying hours, to be able to help your air traffic controllers in their job. Okay. So let's first start with a few basics, and therefore I would like to try to imagine somebody sitting in an aircraft and who's about to go fly. Now, imagine you're sitting there, your engine is running, and you're about to call air traffic control because you're on a controlled aerodrome, of course, and you want to depart, go out of the controlled airspace of the CTR, and eventually, after your flight, come back and land. All right. So the first thing that will happen chronologically is that you will have to place an initial call. All right. This is going to be the first of a series of examples, and I hope that by the end of the webinar we will all be happier about what's going on. The first thing that you're going to want to do is to place an efficient initial call. I did explain it already in one of the previous deliveries of this webinar, but it's so important that I don't have a problem repeating myself. When you place an initial call, or actually a cold call, which is an unsolicited call, so it means that you're placing an initial call that that nobody asked you to place. You're taking the initiative of placing a call. In that case, since the controller is not expecting you to call him or her, the best thing to do is to place a cold call. A cold call is just the call sign of the tower or whoever you're calling, then your call sign, and if you want, you can add a small greeting or a small hello. This is not mandatory, but okay, it's not forbidden either. For example, it could go very well like this: Bournemouth ground, good morning, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. All right, that's enough. Why do we ask you to do that in that way? It's because the first thing a controller is going to do when you call them is that they're going to look for your flight plan. Look if you have one. You may not have one. It may very well be that you decided to go fly without a flight plan. Okay, it's understandable. It's completely acceptable. In some cases, there are rules, of course. But when you place the initial call, the controller will always start by looking in his list, like he will take a look at his computer and say, okay, Golf Alpha Bravo Delta Charlie Delta. No, he's not on my screen. Okay, no flight plan. So what does the controller have to do in that case? Well, he will have to create a small, what we call abbreviated flight plan for you, or an APL. An APL is actually what it stands for, an abbreviated flight plan. So it's going to just be the essential information about your flight, which means the call sign, the aerodrome of departure, of destination. The flight rules are very important, of course, although technically an APL will only be filed for VFR flights. So if you're asking somebody to take down an APL for you, well, it means automatically that you're VFR. But still, I would advise you, when you do that, when you place your call to ATC to say Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, VFR flight from your place to that other place, and you can add things like what altitude you're requesting, through which exit point you want to leave the control zone, through which visual reporting point you want to leave, etc., etc. So, to sum it up, first you place an initial call which is just hello, and then when the controller invites you to continue with your transmission, you pass your request for an APL, or you just can announce your flight as VFR flight with a flight plan, request taxi. That's also perfectly okay. Now, the reason why we do all this is to make sure that everybody is on the same page. This is very important. When a controller ascertains that he's talking to the correct aircraft, when he ascertains that the details that he has are actually the same as what the pilots want to do, then from there they can carry on and actually go through the flight. All right, so first thing, once again, cold call, Bournemouth ground, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, good morning. The controller will reply, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, good morning. As such, it is sufficient. It should be heard as an invitation to pass your message, to continue your transmissions. But the controller can also add something like pass your message, which is my favorite, or go ahead. It's slightly discutable, but we can understand that it's still in very, very common use today. All right, and once that is done, you pass your information, you pass your request, and the controller will issue clearances and instructions all the way to the runway, well, the holding point and the runway and the departure, etc., etc., all the way to the leaving of the controlled airspace. Now, what's important here to stay in, I'd say, good terms with your air traffic controller is to try and stick with a consistent structure of message throughout your flight. And a good idea to do that, to achieve that, is to do it like this. Whenever you as a pilot reply to a controller, so it means that you're replying to a question, or you read back something, an instruction and a clearance that the controller gave you, well, in that case, your call sign, the call sign of your aircraft, should always go at the end of your message. So it should be like this. For example, the controller will tell you, taxi to holding point, runway 25. Right? Well, your readback will be Tower, taxiing to holding point, runway 25, Golf, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. All right, so you see the call sign is placed at the end. This is very important. If you pass new information, if you start something new, if you're triggering yourself a new interaction with air traffic control, for example, after you departed and you're reaching the point of exit of the control zone, for example, right? The controller didn't ask you anything in particular, but you want to say that you're leaving controlled airspace and that, as such, you will be changing frequency at some point because you're no longer under the jurisdiction of ATC. Well, since you are the one who starts the conversation in this case, you will say, Bournemouth Tower, Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta, leaving the control zone over Sierra Echo, for example, if the VRP is Sierra Echo. So you see the difference here. You started, you said something first, so you put your call sign at the beginning of the message, not at the end. All right? That's a very good way of staying in good terms with air traffic controllers, because that way the controller also has an indication very quickly, very intuitively of the contents of the message. And sometimes it can also help the controller focus on who's calling or what he or she wants. That is very, very important. Now, there are things that I've seen as an air traffic controller, and I'm going to share that experience with you because, of course, communication is a very human subject, of course, and we are prone to interpreting the legislation or the ways of working, the working methods, very, very much because it's very human, it's very normal to do it. But I'm going to try and give you a few examples of what not to do or how to be, how shall I say it, more controller friendly in order to try and standardize the communications as much as possible, because that simplifies the job of the air traffic controller very, very much. If everybody, okay, that's really the ideal case here, and I know that it's not something that's really achievable short term, but if somebody were to, no, sorry, if everybody were to to transmit, to communicate in a completely standard way, that would knock off a good 25 to 30% of the workload of the controllers. Yes. Because they would have to spend less time and brain power, if you see the image, in trying to understand what the pilot actually means or wants behind the spoken words. So, for example, I remember that pilot who was very nice, he was a very, very nice gentleman, but every time he came to fly, he was over friendly. He was over polite. He was always, hey, thank you. I so much appreciate the job you do, and that's so nice to fly here at this airport because the controller. Yeah, okay, it's very kind, of course, but what does it bring us? It brings us nothing that's usable in terms of operations, and B, it also consumes a lot of time on the frequency. So if you want, for example, to pass a request runway 06 for landing, that's sufficient. You don't need to go and say something like, hello sir, I'm sorry to disturb you. I hope you will understand why I'm asking this, but could I please ask you if you would be so kind and give us runway 06 because no way. If you want something, say it clearly. And this is what I mentioned in the description of this webinar, the KISS method. K-I-S-S, sorry. Keep it short and simple. Keep it short and sweet also, but keep it short and simple. Try to stay as straightforward as possible in your requests. Say directly what you want, say directly what you mean, okay? It's going to make life easier for everybody if people actually say what they want. I know that I'm just stating the obvious here. As we would say in French, I'm smashing through open doors. But you wouldn't believe how many people think hard about communication strategies. As a pilot, they're sitting in their airplane, and they are there wondering, how am I going to express the fact that I want that runway so that I get it, you know? Because that's okay. I understand that it's the most important fact to consider for a pilot, that if you pass a request to air traffic control, it's most probably because it's most probably because you want it. All right. Now, if you bear with me until the end of the explanation, it's going to make much more, well, quite a lot of sense actually. Okay, so you want something very, very much. Like you want that runway for sure because the sun is going to be in your face if you land opposite, and the wind is not really in the right way, and also it's going to bring you closer to the terminal. Okay, you really want that runway 06. All right. Don't overthink it. However nice you ask for it, however polite you are, however kind you are when you ask for it, is not going to change the result at all. Because controllers are not there to analyze how kind, how nice people are on the frequency with them. The result will be either the runway is available and you're going to get it, or it's not available, and then the controller will tell you, okay, right now it's not possible, but maybe in 10 minutes, either you take the opposite runway or you wait for a while, and then that runway will become available. All right? So, once again, however nicely, however politely you ask, will not change the outcome of the story, will not change the controller's decision. At least that's how it should be. Okay, so what's important when you talk to air traffic controllers is to stay as standard as possible in how you talk to them. Okay, we all understand that it's more a question of structure of messages than vocab. I know that not everything can be transmitted using standard phraseology. Okay, for example, if you have to express the fact that the door of your aircraft is not closed all too well, and you would like to land as soon as possible. Of course, there is no phraseology for that. Yeah, there's nothing in the ICAO Annex 10 under door slightly open. You just have to come up with something like Tower Golf Alpha Bravo Charlie Delta. My door is open or is not closed well. Request landing instructions. See what I did here? I tried to build a sentence that is as close as possible to phraseology, while still being able to include elements that that correspond to the situation at hand. Right? That's quite the important thing, because you passed the message, and at the same time you stayed as standard as possible. All right? So it's more a question of structure than a question of vocab. All right? And then another thing that's important, try to be as straightforward as possible, try to be as simple as possible when you talk to air traffic controllers. Not only because that will be less work for you as a pilot, you will not have to think too much about what or how to say things. And also it will be less work for the controller, which means more time for the others and more time to spend planning traffic, which may actually play quite well for you, because if the controller has more time to do a better planning of traffic, then it means that it can be more efficient and that you will get what you want or what you need quicker. Okay. All right. This being said, there are still a few things that need to be told about air traffic control, about how to interact with them. And that would be the first thing, that's especially true for student pilots. Don't be afraid to say what you mean, okay? As long as it's something useful, as long as it's something that belongs on the frequency. Air traffic controllers are not policemen. They're not there to make order or to give you a fine or punishment if you don't do what's right. Air traffic controllers are just there for traffic. And if you enable them to stay efficient, if you play by the book, if you continue, if you enable air traffic controllers in providing a good job to everybody, then you will never have a problem with them. I was an air traffic controller, and I've never shouted at anyone, and I've never been to the apron and pull somebody by the ear, say you did something very, very wrong there. No, that's not our job. A controller, and here, if I have air traffic controllers in the audience, like the previous times, I would like to insist on this. Air traffic control is not a job to give admonition to people. This is extremely, extremely important. We, as air traffic controllers, should be the ones who guarantee the safety of everybody, and also by enabling, by permitting everybody to fly in a good state of mind. And that means stress-free, okay? It reminds me of a story that happened. There was this student pilot, and okay, he didn't understand the radio all too well. Notably, the QNH seemed to be a big problem, big issue. And what did happen in the end is that the guy was really stuttering and struggling with the readback of the QNH. And the person that was working, the air traffic control that was working the sector, then started becoming a little bit nervous because there was a lot of traffic, and this was all basically a waste of time. Telling somebody, I mean, having to repeat to somebody on the ground for 6 or 7 times that the QNH is 1021, trying to elicit a proper readback from them can be quite nerve-wracking. But because the controller became nervous, what happened is that the poor student completely lost his abilities because of stress, became overwhelmed, and said, okay, you know what, I'm canceling my flight, I'm not going to fly, I can't do it like this is not possible, I'm not okay. All right. Whilst I do remember that another colleague one day had a massive airspace infringement, something very solid that caused a lot of trouble. Go-arounds, avoidance, etc. And that infringement, of course, was by somebody who didn't call, so it was impossible to discuss the issue with that pilot. Who actually turned out to be a student pilot, and when the student pilot came back to land, the controller made the right decision, I think, and didn't say anything on the frequency to that student about the infringement, and gave instructions as normal, as always, as every day, to that pilot to let him land back on the airport, to make sure that everything went smoothly and fine. And only after that, once the student was back on the ground and was back basically at the school, then the controller gave a telephone call to the school saying, okay, could I speak to the instructor of that student? Yes, okay, let's look, here's what happened, and I'm really not happy about it, but well, okay. Stressing people on the frequency is really not a good idea, because eventually they're going to cause even more problems because they will be stressed. And if we're talking about student pilots, young pilots, you may even wind up causing incidents or accidents because of somebody being overwhelmed with stress. All right. So I hope that shed a little bit of light on how to handle air traffic control. And we will now go to the viewers' questions. All right, welcome back. And before we start, I would like to thank everybody again who sent in a question. This is really great. I'm really happy to see all the questions that are coming in. And well, we don't have time for everybody, of course, but I'll be happy to answer by email to whoever sent us a question and I didn't have the chance to respond to it live. All right. So the first question we have chronologically is coming from Stephen in Denmark. And Stephen asks me, if my transponder breaks down in flight, what will air traffic controllers do? Can they send me away or refuse my flight altogether? All right. Stephen, thanks for writing. And here's how it goes. We did talk about transponders a few weeks ago, but basically transponders are very important pieces of equipment for air traffic controllers, because nowadays with the modern systems, the modern radar systems, they became quite an indispensable piece of equipment for air traffic controllers to see. So I can't give you a straight answer saying that all controllers will refuse you or all controllers will still accept you even if you don't have a transponder. It doesn't work like that. The thing is, it will depend on how you prepared the flight, on when it happens, on when the breakdown happens, because you can very well imagine that if the breakdown happens before you even start the engine, before you even take off, then the controllers will probably tell you, okay, unless you want to fly to a maintenance place to have it repaired, I'm sorry, but this is not going to happen. So I'm not going to do that because I have a lot of traffic, for example. So it can also depend on the conditions, on the circumstances of the controller. If there's zero traffic, if you're the only one to fly, then why not? You could very well go fly in controlled airspace where transponders are normally mandatory, but that day, because you're the only one in the CTR, well, why not? Let's go. Or if you've flown 2 hours and you're just coming back to the aerodrome and you're turning base or even turning final and the breakdowns happen there, well, the controller will not tell you to go around and then get out of the airspace and go land somewhere else. Logically, they will try to shorten the ordeal and make you land as soon as possible. All right. The second question we have comes from Isabel in Charleroi, Belgium. I heard so many times that air traffic control gives speed restrictions to jets, to airliners. Why does it never happen to general aviation? That's quite a good question. Thank you for asking it. Speed control, as we call it, is mostly done with high performance aircraft. That's to start with, right? Because the range of speeds at which a general aviation can fly is generally much more limited. So a light Piper Archer will stall at 60 knots and will have a maximum speed about 125 knots. So we can't, I mean, we could give speed control, of course, we could, but we generally don't do it because if we need somebody to fly a specific speed, it means that we're providing separation by that. And a reduction of 20 knots or 30 knots is not going to help us in many cases, especially at low speed. So usually it will be efficient if we ask somebody to fly 180 knots instead of 250. That can be significant difference for us. But that's why you really don't see it much for general aviation. But it's not because it's general aviation, it's more a question of performance than anything else, really. All right, next question comes from one of our most assiduous watchers, Pavel from Slovakia. Greetings from Slovakia, so greetings from Spain, Pavel. And Pavel asks us, what is our opinion about requesting entrance or exit of control zone outside of official exit or entry points while flying VFR? Okay. Well, my opinion is that as with anything with air traffic control, as long as you don't take it for granted, it's perfectly okay. So let me explain a little bit further here. You have, let's say, 4 exit points from a CTR. And of course, as fate would have it, you would like to leave the control zone in a completely different place because it shortens your flight and you're on a tight schedule, so you want it to go as fast as possible. All right. It's perfectly okay to ask air traffic controllers, request to leave via runway heading, for example, or to leave via that town. Put in the town name there, it's going to be perfectly okay to ask, as long as you accept the answer that you're being given. And also, and that's very important, be careful what you ask for, because we may just very well give it to you. And once we tell you, okay, that's approved, we expect you to be able to do it. So if it's something that you're not used to doing, well, it might prove to be a little bit tricky, and then it wouldn't be the first time that somebody asks an air traffic controller, okay, can I do this? And then the controller would say, yeah, sure, no problem, go ahead, do it. And then the pilot would end up like, you know what, it's actually more complicated than I thought. So as long as you're prepared to actually carry out your plan and be able to do it properly, you can always ask for it. There is, however, one very important thing, and that is to plan your flight in a standard way. So what I mean by that is that, okay, you're going to ask for something non-standard, to leave somewhere else. Okay. The controller will either say yes or no, but you have to be ready to revert to the standard route at any point. So if the controller says no, negative, it's not possible, you can't do it the way you want, I need you to do it standard, you must be able to do it standard just like that, without hesitation, without saying, yeah, but now I have to replan my navigation. No, that's not okay. You must have a plan that takes you in and out of controlled airspace through approved, published routings. Once you have that, you can ask for shortcuts, or you can ask for other exits or entries. That's okay. As long as you're ready to accept whatever answer comes from the controller. If the controller says no, you must be able to fly standard. If the controller says yes, on the other hand, you must be able to actually do what you asked for. Okay? There, I hope it answers your question. The fourth question for today is, can air traffic control give vectors to a small VFR aircraft? That's coming from Miroslav in Belgrade, Serbia. And Miroslav, well, okay. Now, I'm treading on a very dangerous ground here, because I know that it's something very common. It's common practice in many places that air traffic controllers will issue radar vectors to VFR flights. Now, I would warn against it, caution against it very, very, very much. Not only is it in theory not approved, not okay to do it, but practically you have to consider that VFR pilots rely to navigate, or may rely on navigate to their observation of the ground. Normally that's how they do it, okay? Some of them don't have a tablet or a beautiful GPS to lead them. Some of them still fly with a chart, with a paper chart, and by looking at the ground, what's underneath them. Which means that if you do give, or if a VFR flight is being given a radar vector, you may actually be taking the pilot completely away from his or her intended routing, and thereby bringing them to a position where they have no idea where they are. And as a controller, at that point you're going to be in trouble, because that's your fault. You are the one who took the pilot to an unknown place. So that's why I would recommend to air traffic controllers to be extremely careful when doing that. I know that it can be handy. I've seen it happen also with night VFRs, because at night sectors are closed and there are less controllers, so you have to handle an IFR arrival together with a VFR, and you want to delay the VFR flight by giving vectors. Alright, yeah, it's understandable. I know that it's very tempting to do it like that, because it's It's very easy, of course. But please remember at all times that VFR pilots may not be able to find their way as easily as IFR can, because they don't, or they're not supposed to use instruments to find themselves. And on top of that, the instruments may not be quite as precise or as precisely set as you would expect an IFR pilot to do. For example, an IFR pilot would probably check the accuracy of his direction indicator more often than a VFR pilot would do, because for an IFR pilot, that's the only directional reference, right? Whilst an IFR whilst a VFR pilot may easily overlook the repeated synchronization of the directional indicator, because they're looking outside the window all the time. So it's okay if the DI is a little bit off. So once again, be careful with it. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not again the one to bring you to justice if you breach regulations. That's absolutely not the point of this webinar. But I'm saying it's not approved. If you choose to do it, it's on you. And please do it reasonably. Do it wisely. Okay? So for example, if you know that by doing it, the aircraft will acquire visual contact with the aerodrome, then okay, I would understand that somebody do it. But I would personally still not. But okay, that's another question. It's a question of personal choice, of course. Okay, so I will answer the other questions by email, because we're nearing the end of this webinar. Once again, thank you so much for attending. Again, it's been a great pleasure building this show for you. And once again, I'm really baffled by the number of viewers we have, both online, on YouTube, and privately. So thank you. Have a nice week. Stay safe. The end of the tunnel is hopefully in sight. We all look forward to getting out there and fly again. So stay at home for a few more days, and hopefully we will go back to the sky very shortly. Have a nice evening. Have a nice week. Stay safe. And until next week, my friends. Bye-bye.